The disappearance of Stephen Kubacki. It was February 1978, and Stephen Kubacki, a 23-year-old college student at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, was an experienced outdoorsman. That winter, he decided to take a solo cross-country skiing trip near the southeastern edge of Lake Michigan in an area known for its harsh winters and vast frozen landscapes. Kubacki set out on his journey as planned, but he never returned. The next day, when he failed to check in, his family and friends grew concerned. A search team was quickly assembled, combing through the snowy terrain near Lake Michigan to find any trace of him. Eventually, searchers discovered Kubacki's footprints in the snow. The trail led toward the frozen lake, then abruptly stopped. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Rescue teams scoured the area, but they found no signs of Kubacki, no broken ice, and no additional footprints leading away. The frozen lake stretched out endlessly, and with no further clues, the search was called off. Kubacki was presumed dead, either lost in the icy wilderness or drowned beneath the lake's surface. Then, in May 1979, something inexplicable happened. A full 15 months after he had disappeared, Stephen Kubacki suddenly reappeared, not in Michigan, but in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles away. He was lying in a grassy field completely unharmed. His hair was longer, but he was in good physical health. His clothes were different from the ones he had been wearing when he vanished, and he was carrying a small satchel filled with maps and random hitchhiking signs from various cities. But the most disturbing part? Kubacki had no memory of what had happened to him. When questioned by authorities, he was unable to recall anything after his skiing trip. He couldn't explain how he had ended up hundreds of miles away, or why he was carrying the items in his bag. It was as if 15 months had been completely erased from his mind. Doctors examined him, but found no signs of physical trauma, mental illness, or drug use that could explain the missing time. When the media caught wind of the story, reporters pressed him for answers. But Kubacki simply stated, "I don't remember." And just like that, he walked away from the mystery and never looked back. Unlike most people who return from mysterious disappearances, Kubacki chose to never publicly pursue answers. After giving a few brief interviews, he disappeared from the public eye, later earning a PhD in clinical psychology and living a quiet life. In a rare interview years later, when asked if he had ever regained any memories of what happened, Kubacki simply replied, "I don't want to talk about it." The man who returned 50 years after his death. The bizarre case of Leroy Thomas. Leroy Thomas was a 30-year-old man living in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the early 1900s. He was known to be a quiet but hard-working man who worked at a local factory. On the evening of September 18, 1926, Leroy told his wife, Margaret Thomas, that he was going to drive to a friend's house to discuss a business venture. That was the last time anyone saw him. The next morning, his car was found abandoned near the Mississippi River, just outside of town. The engine was still warm, and his wallet, keys, and even an uneaten sandwich were inside. But Leroy was gone. A massive search operation followed, with authorities dragging the river, questioning locals, and even considering foul play. However, no body was found, and no evidence of a struggle existed. His case went cold. With no answers, Leroy was eventually declared legally dead in 1932. His wife remarried, and life moved on. In July 1978, a man in his 30s was found wandering in the small town of Beaumont, Texas. He was confused, disoriented, and wearing clothes that looked nearly a century old, but were in perfect condition. When police picked him up, he told them his name was Leroy Thomas and asked, "Where's my wife?" When questioned, he claimed that the last thing he remembered was driving to visit a friend in New Orleans the night he disappeared in 1926. At first, the police thought he was mentally ill or a fraud, but when they ran his fingerprints, the results stunned them. Leroy Thomas had been officially declared dead 50 years earlier, but his fingerprints were a perfect match to records from 1926. Even more bizarre, he had not aged a single day. His skin, hair, and physical features were exactly the same as when he disappeared. Medical exams showed that he was perfectly healthy, with no signs of aging, malnutrition, or any of the typical effects of long-term disappearance. The mysterious case of Benjamin Kyle, the man without a past. On the morning of August 31st, 2004, workers at a Burger King in Richmond Hill, Georgia, made a shocking discovery. Behind the restaurant's dumpster lay a naked, sunburned, and badly beaten man. He was covered in fire ant bites. His hair was long and matted, and he had severe cataracts in both eyes. The police were called, and the man was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital in Savannah, Georgia. When he awoke, he was confused, disoriented, and had no idea who he was. He could not remember his name, his age, or where he was from. The only clue? He said that he thought his name might be Benjamin, but he wasn't sure. Doctors diagnosed him with retrograde amnesia, meaning he had completely lost all memories of his past. He didn't know his birthday. He didn't remember his family. He had no ID, no social security number, and no records anywhere. He was essentially a ghost, a man who had no official existence. For years, police, private investigators, and even the FBI tried to uncover his identity. They ran his fingerprints, checked missing person databases, and even scanned his retinas, but there were no matches. In 2015, after 11 years of being lost to the world, a breakthrough finally came. A forensic genealogist named C.C. Moore used advanced DNA tracing to locate his relatives. She discovered that his real name was William Burgess Powell, and he was born on August 29, 1948, in Lafayette, Indiana. His family had not been looking for him because they thought he had cut ties with them in the 1970s. It turned out that Powell had left his home in Indiana in 1976 and had not been seen since. But where had he been between 1976 and 2004? Even after learning his real name, Benjamin Kyle had no memory of those missing decades. One of the biggest remaining mysteries is what happened to him between 1976 and 2004. There are no records of him during those years. His family never saw or heard from him. His fingerprints never appeared in any database. The last confirmed event in his life, before his disappearance, was that he left his family in 1976. After that, he vanished for nearly 30 years before being found outside the Burger King in 2004. Some theorists believe he may have been homeless or living under another name. Others think he may have suffered a traumatic event that erased his memories.